I simulated Jurassic World Dominion's Biosyn Sanctuary for 100 days. In these lands are some of the largest, fiercest, and most intelligent creatures to have ever walked planet Earth. From the giants that make the ground shake, to the flying monsters that once ruled our sky. Over the course of 100 days, witness the rise and the fall of nature's finest creations. As we watch the creatures of Biosyn Sanctuary produce their offspring and fight for the survival of their species, the question remains, can life find a way to survive in paradise, or are they all doomed to die? Well, to find out, it's time to go back to day one. The Biosyn Sanctuary was never meant to be a spectacle. Unlike the theme parks that came before it, it was designed as a place of containment. A vast, isolated valley engineered to house dinosaurs away from the modern world. Hidden deep within a mountain range, the sanctuary relied on geography rather than fences, and over the next 100 days, it will be home to our dinosaurs. This sanctuary is already full of dinosaurs, some that people may already be quite familiar with, but plenty more still to be added. Biosyn's philosophy was simple: if dinosaurs could be separated from human civilization, nature would eventually find its own balance, and over the course of 100 days, it's up to us to see if that will happen. One species that needed little introduction is the Tyrannosaurus Rex. In the Biosyn Sanctuary are our three iconic Rexes: Buck, Doe, and Rexy. These tyrannosaurs were the largest theropod dinosaurs in the valley, although whether they had laid claim to the apex title over the sleeping Giganotosaurus would remain to be seen. Also prowling the valley was our Therizinosaurus, who I named Terry. Terry was a no-nonsense, solitary type creature who did not appreciate the company of any other living being. So no doubt Terry would not appreciate the arrival of the very first creature to Biosyn. This is Norman, an Acrocanthosaurus. Norman had been rescued from some poachers who had tried to sell him on eBay, and now found himself with a new dominion to explore. At roughly 12 meters long and weighing 6 tons, trackway evidence suggests the Acrocanthosaurus would have been used to being highly dominant within its ecosystem. On the smaller end of the scale, Plod the Pyroraptor had his very own section of the valley to himself, with a nice burning plain in the background for some. I'm sure I've seen this plain somewhere before. Down in the other side of the valley, our resident stegosaurs enjoyed grazing on some vegetation, while the tyrannosaurs gorged themselves on a nearby feeder. While our Biosyn Valley was built to let our dinosaurs roam free, if all our apex predators killed for meals every single time, it risked the wipeout of an entire ecosystem. So for this exact reason, feeders were installed across the sanctuary. Yet this dispute was not about just food. This Triceratops had gotten too close to a stegosaur, and one swing of its Thagomizer later, and the Triceratops were all aware they were not welcome in this part of the valley. Instead, they performed a partial migration in search of their own land, and to reward them, a nice nest was placed down where they would hopefully one day be able to create a family of their own. But even creatures such as the Triceratops would have to remember to look above them at times, as the skies of this valley were ruled by Steve, a Quetzalcoatlus. Among the largest flying animals to ever exist, when on the ground, this thing was roughly giraffe-sized, and fossil evidence seems to suggest it spent a lot of time on the ground rather than actually flying. Steve, however, wasn't the only flyer in this valley, as a family of pteranodons had also made Biosyn Valley their home. These flyers would be an absolute menace to any small to medium-sized dinosaurs, and this Dilophosaur did not fancy being hunted today, running into the nearest clearing to fetch itself a drink of water. But more arrivals were now imminent in the valley, and a pack of Utahraptors were delivered by delivery crate after being found roaming the desert. The largest known, Dromaeosaurid, would make sure to make its mark on the ecosystem, and for the creatures of Biosyn Valley, a real threat had just emerged. Catching up with our resident Giganotosaurus, who I had now nicknamed Glinda, I witnessed her first interactions with Norman the Acrocanthosaurus. How long these two apex predators would be able to put up with each other's presence remains to be seen. But for now, they got on just fine, after exchanging a couple of fierce looks at each other. The newly introduced Utahraptors were fighting for supremacy, and once they had finished pouncing on one another, the winner was confirmed as Uzi, who will now lead the Utahraptor pack. In the Great Valley, there was another commotion looming as an Ankylosaur and Stegosaur squared up to one another. This time, both creatures decided against drastic action, but the Stegosaurs did not appear to appreciate sharing their territory. Next to be introduced to the Biosyn Sanctuary was a host of Archaeornithomimus, who would keep our resident sauropods company. But in perhaps bigger news, it appeared that life had already found a way in this ecosystem, as 4 baby Triceratops emerged from a nest. After being forced to move territory, it appeared that the Triceratops had now not only found a new home, but a new family for them all to share and revel in. But even after these new arrivals, the Biosyn Sanctuary had plenty of room for more dinosaurs. And next up to be released was a host of dryosaurs, who would have to have their wits about them to survive, but would also provide an ample food source for smaller predators. One of these smaller predators would be a baby tyrannosaur, as the tyrannosaurs had claimed a nesting site nearby and laid a singular egg. With the 3 adult tyrannosaurs beginning to significantly age, it would be important for the survival of their species that they reproduced. But in a nearby clearing, something massive was afoot. Norman the Acrocanthosaur was squaring up to the apex of the Biosyn Valley. In what was expected to be a dramatic close fight, the unthinkable happened, and Norma took out Glinda with a single hit. This ecosystem, on day 5, had just been turned upside down, and I think that it's fair that we pay our respects to Glinda in the comments below. R.I.P. Glinda, the former apex of Biosyn Valley. For Norman, however, this was a colossal victory, and one that firmly put his name at the top of the valley's food chain. The Biosyn Valley, however, was shortly about to be welcoming several new arrivals, and to be ready for these, I would need to make a new wetlands habitat, with plenty of deep water to satisfy their needs. I began to create this biome, but once more was taken away as another fight between the Stegosaur and the Ankylosaur had emerged. While there was no fatal blow landed in this fight, this Ankylosaur, who I named Alice, had lost half of her health and would need to be more careful moving forward. But on day 15, I soon found myself following what can only be described as a battle of stamina. A Pteranodon was attempting to chase down this Archaeopneus, while both stopped to rest only meters from each other. I sensed as both creatures rested, and I named the prey Kevin, that this battle was not over just yet. In the southern section of the Biosyn Valley, we had a new introduction, the Edmontosaurus. This duck-billed herbivore from late Cretaceous North America reached up to 12 meters long and likely lived in massive herds. But these Edmontosaurs would have to be on guard, as they were released into the nearby territory of our resident Quetzalcoatlus, Steve. While Steve was content on snacking on fish for now, this flying reptile was a dinosaur killer, and Edmontosaurus immediately attempted to put some distance between themselves and Steve. I caught back up with Terry, who appeared to be intent on camouflaging himself in his sleep, either that or he was still looking for Claire from Jurassic World Dominion. But we couldn't stay with Terry for much longer, as the Great Hunt 2.0 was on again, and this now starving Pteranodon was after Kevin once more. Kevin once again did pull off a miraculous escape, but he now found himself in the snow section of the valley, far away from the rest of his kind, and still in huge danger. But in happier news, Biosyn Valley was now pleased to announce the arrival of our juvenile Tyrannosaurus Rex. This little fella immediately popped out of his egg and started to run towards the meat feeder before taking a very well-earned break. Still, with so many dangers lurking around every corner in Biosyn, the Tyrannosaurs would have to look out for their little one to make sure that he stayed safe. In the south, an all-familiar battle was recommencing once more. The Stegosaurs versus the Ankylosaur was back for round 3, and this time the Ankylosaur did manage to land the first hit. However, the Stegosaur's Phagomizer appeared to be a much more effective weapon in this 1 versus 1 fight, and the Ankylosaur limped away once more. All of this had distracted us from the sad death of Kevin, who had finally perished at the hands of the Pteranodon. Run free, Kevin, you truly put up a great fight. R.I.P. to Kevin in the comments below. But we couldn't dwell on the sad loss of Kevin for too much longer, as it was time to introduce the Baryonyx and the Suchomimus to the brand new aquatic wetlands section of our ecosystem. These two piscivores would be happy to coexist together, which was a nice change, and meant there would be no all-out war between the two species. However, that didn't mean they wouldn't have competition, as this is the Dinokairos. Fossils of the Dinokairos were found with fish remains in its ribcage, and its broad duck-like snout and riverside lifestyle fit perfectly with scooping or snapping up fish alongside plants. It would be a more than capable match for our two piscivores, who were already sorting out who would lead their respective species by fighting amongst themselves. Suzy eventually emerged victorious, and thus would be the leader of the Suchomimus. But while the Suchos were fighting amongst themselves, the Baryonyxes were instead set on doing everything possible to ensure their species survived by almost immediately reproducing. All while this chaos was happening, the Dinokairos was just having a quick bathe and relaxing in this beautiful environment. Since the birth of their young, the Tyrannosaurs had barely budged from their clearing, and this is hardly surprising, with fossil finds showing Tyrannosaurs of different ages found together, suggesting family groups rather than solitary adults. Bone studies also indicate slow growth to adulthood, which in modern animals often goes hand in hand with extended parental care. But we don't have such information on the next creature to be introduced to Biosyn, the Spinosaurus. On day 20, this ultra-aggressive, strong Spinosaur had been rescued from Africa, and after a long journey, it had now arrived in the sanctuary, determined to leave its mark. While it would likely stick to the rivers and feed on fish, it would not back down if challenged by another apex predator, and with sheer size on its side, it would take a lot to take it down. Later that day, yet more African carnivores arrived on the scene in the Dolomites, though this one is not quite as mighty.
You're drunk already, aren't you, buddy?
The Majungasaurus is easy to identify by its small protruding horn at the top of its skull. Scientists have also found evidence of cannibalism within this species, but with only one member at the sanctuary so far, there is no risk of that just yet. But with all the aggressive carnivores emerging in the sanctuary, it is important that we continue to spend time with the smaller, calmer, and cuter specimens, such as this juvenile Triceratops, who was enjoying life by doing absolutely nothing. What an absolute chap. Alice the Ankylosaurus was looking much worse for wear now. Her brawl with the Stegosaur had resulted in devastating consequences. Stegosaur's Thagomizer had pierced deep beneath her armoured hide, causing internal bleeding. Without outside assistance, her chances of survival were slim. Renovations had now been performed in the sanctuary. Snow and water areas were added to diversify the territories here and give all our creatures a shot at survival. Petrie had found his way to the new zone, hoping to find some food, but alas, there was none. More new species were also planned for the sanctuary, ranging drastically in size from the long and slender Diplodocus to the small but cunning Velociraptors. There was also set to be new life in the Dolomites soon, as Uzi the Utahraptor was an expecting parent, hatching 2 eggs in a nearby nest. But as always in this sanctuaries, there cannot be new life without old life expiring. Alice the Ankylosaur had succumbed to her Thagomizer-induced internal bleeding, showing that herbivores can truly be just as deadly as carnivores. Attracted to the snow, the Pyroraptor pack emigrated to the new frosty area. Unfortunately, Plod was still stuck at the top with the crashed plane, and it would remain to be seen whether he would be able to find his way to his new pack. The Pyroraptors, however, were settling in well to their new habitat, taking a nice swim in the freezing lake. Swimming was a popular pastime among the dinosaurs here, as the Dinochirises and Baryonyxes alike were enjoying a dip in the European sun. A few days later, Uzi's children hatched out of their eggs, producing a pair of twins, one grey in colour with the other yellow. They wasted no time in getting started on the development of their social skills, with some play fighting. But now it was time for Biosyn to welcome the most famous dromaeosaur species of the Cretaceous, the Velociraptor. Most known for their prominent and razor-sharp frontal claws, these raptors were rapid, ferocious pack hunters, who often leave their targets begging for a quick and painless death. Led by Mayhem, who was a particularly menacing-looking raptor, these raptors were sure to make their mark on the sanctuary. Although there had been a casualty in their turf wars, the Ankylosaurs were still determined to take the grassy, rich with food territory away from the Stegosaurs, and the interspecies conflicts continued. Both the Ankylosaur and Sally the Stegosaur landed powerful hits, with the Ank relying on pure power, while Sally put finesse to use with her sharp Thagomizers. In the end, it was once more the Ankylosaur who ran away worse for wear, though fortunately it did survive this time with no major injuries to speak of. Sally proudly celebrated her victory, and the Stegosaurs were looking dominant. There were also disputes among the Tyrannosaurs, but instead of territory, it was for the alpha position. Husband and wife, Buck and Doe, were challenging each other for that position. Strikes were exchanged, but none were powerful enough to injure each other. In the end, it was Buck who maintained his position as leader of the Tyrannosaurs. Doe ran off for now, but I'm sure there were no harsh feelings in the long term. As we approached day 40, the natural circle of life was now in full effect. The birth of 2 new Baryonyxes brought fresh life into the ecosystem, while the death of the Edmontosaurus at the beak of Steve took life away, though in its corpse was providing the Quets with valuable nutrition that would keep Steve going for a few days longer. The Diplodocus herd had finally arrived at the sanctuary, and the Rexes in the distance were not paying too much attention to the large stacks of meat, just yet at least, so the sauropods could continue to flourish through vast amounts of food. The Velociraptors had claimed their first victim since their arrival, as this specimen took down a Dilophosaur. No doubt, this would be the first of many. The raptor species were truly in the hunting season now, and this time it was Uzi the Utahraptor whose turn it was to hunt down her prey. The poor Gallimimus gave a gallant effort in fleeing, but ultimately stood no chance. juvenile Rex was finally given a name synonymous with vicious killers, Jason. A name that will truly strike fear into the whole sanctuary once he grows up at least. But the following day, another major breakthrough occurred as Biosyn Sanctuary expanded its portfolio in dinosaur collection. Now with the facilities to access the dinosaur black market, a whole new avenue of dinosaur acquisition had opened up. With our debut purchase, it was only appropriate to go big, and we bought 5 Therizinosaurs from an illegal zoo for just shy of $60 million, 3 male and 2 female. They were airlifted into the western side of our ecosystem, where Terry resided, with little delicacy from our helicopters. The second purchase from the dino market was a more modest one, with 6 Olera Titans being purchased for a more reasonable $380,000. They were airlifted in towards the south, and within the space of a day, the hadrosaur population within the park had grown significantly, as 4 baby Edmontosaurs hatched from their very own nest. For a moment, it looked like there was going to be a brawl between the 2 piscivores in the sanctuary, as the Baryonyx charged towards the Enquiries. In the end though, it all turned out to be an act, as it ran past the Enquiries and into the lily pad covered water. Later that day, more Stegosaurs arrived into the sanctuary, to probably cause even more pain for the Ankylosaur herd. Antisocial and territorial Terry met his new companions for the very first time, and surprise surprise, he did not like them. Terry fought tooth and nail, quite literally, against the new alpha of the group. In the end, it was the new arrival who turned out victorious. The hard life in its former zoo had really roughened out its edges, and he was given the name Thierry. For Terry now, he must either adapt and live within his new group, or most likely be killed. He tried his luck in observing and socialising with an eating fairy, and then groomed himself with his claws before standing awkwardly beside it. Not bad for Terry's first time socialising, I'd say. After a brief intermission away from the ferries to watch Uzi taking a dip, there was carnage, as Norman had now stumbled across the new flock. Thierry took it upon his duty to defend the group from this new, bulking threat, but was quickly wiped out by the much larger, stronger carnivore. Norman moved on back towards the forest, before he was spotted by the Spinosaurus, who attempted to intimidate him, but to no success. There was infighting between our 2 latest arrivals. The Proceratosaurus was an early member of the Tyrannosaur family, whose fossils were found in England, home to other famous figures such as the Baryonyx, David Beckham, and some YouTuber called Rampy. Measuring in at about 4 meters in length, this species was easily distinguished because of its nasal crest that was used for display. They could be quite boisterous in victory, but also vulnerable to larger predators, as they are not as impressive as the species they would eventually evolve into. Terry's social development did not last very long, and he soon went back to his old ways of being fiercely territorial and fighting everything that came near him. He betrayed the purple-hued fairy that trusted him, fought it, and forced it to flee. Some things just never change, and Terry will forever be a menace. More eggs, however, were then found in the sanctuary. The first batch of 2 belonged to Uzi, who would welcome more Utahraptors to a family. It is unknown who the second batch of eggs belonged to, but all I can say is that there are 4 of them, and they are in a much larger nest. The latest batch of Stegosaurs had not fully integrated into the herd as a whole, and some believed themselves to be higher in the pecking order than they actually were. A fight for dominance broke out between the original alpha and one of the new Stegosaurs. It was a long drawn-out battle between the 2, as Phagomized tails exchanged blows, but no serious damage was done. Eventually the original alpha proved why it was the boss, while the rookie fled with its tail between its legs. More decoration and plant life was added to the river, where Big Mike and Majungosauruses were loitering, far away from the rest of dinosaur civilization. Based on Big Mike's low health, I think it is likely that he may have just fought off a Majungosaur. Back with Norman, our Acrocanthosaur, he was now on a killing spree. A second Therizinosaur had fallen to his overpowering strength. Not even eating them, Norman was hunting for sport. As he basked in the Italian sun, another Therizinosaur wandered close, but fortunately for it, Norman paid it no attention. I returned to the dinosaur market in search of some more herbivores. I ended up purchasing 4 Sauropelters for the price of $900,000, which I thought would be a decent deal. Later that day, another Proceratosaurus was found dead, this one falling victim to a Pyroraptor. I was starting to think that these small guys just don't have what it takes to survive the brutal world that is Biosyn Sanctuary. But one species that is adept at surviving is the Utahraptor, which welcomed its new members with open arms. Also proficient in the noble art of survival was Steve, who was enjoying the fruits of an Edmontosaurus that it had just hunted down. It had been a while since Glinda had been killed by Norman, and the species needed to be brought back from extinction for a second time. This absolute unit this time was going to be genetically enhanced, making it a monster in the combative arts, and potentially would be able to handle Norman. But before it could be bred, I did also have to give Norman a partner in crime. A second round Acrocanthosaur emerged from the hatchery, ready to bring chaos supreme to the sanctuary. By the river, new life was wandering curiously out of their nest. A trio of Suchomimus babies had been born and were looking around, calling for their parents, who were nowhere to be found. This aqua green one was the leader and was given the name Shire. The Spinosaurus had been in the Biosing Sanctuary for some time, but hadn't done anything of note so far. I followed it around for a while in an exercise of wasting time, to find it resting and basking for an extremely long time. In the end, it got up and started running through the water for a bit, but that was about as exciting as it got. Now, I bet you're all wondering whether or not I had been scammed on the black market. I am delighted to report that I was not, and the Sauropelta herd was settling in nicely in their new home. Also settling in nicely was this group of Pachycephalosauruses, where a pair were ceremoniously headbutting each other for dominance and display. At around 4 meters in length, fossils of these domed-headed lizards were found in North America, and evidence suggests that they enjoyed feeding on low-hanging plant life. Their domed skulls were extremely useful when defending themselves against small predators, such as this Dilophosaurus, who found out the hard way. Despite his resistance at first, and it took a lot of adapting, patience and claws to the face, Terry is now a fully indoctrinated member of the Therizinosaurus group. In sanctuaries like this, where death could be around every corner, safety in numbers is vital. The new Sauropelta group from the black market now faced their first challenge, as Uzi had wandered close. This brave member of the species squared up to the large dromaeosaur, but Uzi struck first, and struck hard, impressing her young who watched on. In an act of tactical brilliance, Uzi feigned disinterest and began walking away, only for her partner to swarm in after the Sauropelta had lowered its guard, giving it an easy kill, and some food for the whole family to feast on. This young Utahraptor named Lucky took full advantage of the corpse, enjoying its first hefty meal of its lifetime. However, the Utahraptors were not done there though, as another duel commenced between one and a Sauropelta. This time the fight was over in just a single bite, and the Sauropelta fell weakly to the carnivore. Throughout all this time, the Diplodocuses had been living a relatively stress-free and enjoyable life, and had now decided it was time to start a family. That was a few days ago, and since they had laid their eggs, Rexy had been harassing them non-stop, as the two new babies hatched into a war zone, with one of their parents being attacked. On day 50 and the halfway point of our ecosystem's life, more renovations and natural sculpting were taking place to make our currently lowly populated area of the ecosystem more habitable for the species that currently reside here, such as this juvenile Oliver Titan, who got lost and separated from its herd and was desperate for some food. So it was only right that I gave it the appropriate food, so it could survive and live for another day at least. The new beefy Giganotosauruses had been cooked up in the lab and were now ready for incubation. Soon, there may potentially be a new alpha species in the sanctuary. But before then, there was a gladiatorial level battle taking place as the two current apexes met in the modern day prehistoric Colosseum. An aging Tyrannosaurus Rex and Osborne squared up for the biggest battle of these 100 days so far, far surpassing the brawl between Norman and Glinda. However, this fight turned out to be just as anticlimactic, as the Acrocanthosaurus just as easily dispatched of the now elderly Tyrannosaur. Perhaps in its prime, the Rex would have put up a bit more of a fight, but for now the Acrocanthosaur can indisputably claim that it's the alpha of the Dolomites, until the new steroid-enhanced Gigas arrived at least. Another fight was threatening to take place between the Majungasaurs and one of the Triceratops. But upon realising the size difference between itself and its targeted prey, the Majungasaur wisely decided to abandon the fight before it could even begin. Away from all the action, living a life of calm solitude, Plod the Pyroraptor was taking a leisurely swim in its frozen lake, where the burning plane of Owen and that other character was still burning after all this time. With the Ankylosaurs put in their place now, the Stegosaurus herd could now live, eat, and breed in peace, as they welcomed triplets into their already decently sized herd. And Steve was still performing his favourite hobby, Edmontosaur hunting. Well accustomed to the task at hand by now, Steve gracefully swooped down and grabbed the Hadrosaur by the neck, before killing it with smooth efficiency, giving him another meal that would nourish him for several days to come. Despite the size difference, this Majungasaurus was left with little choice but to engage with the Triceratops. People who believe in dreams and miracles often achieve them, and this Majungasaur believed so hard that it managed to take down its much larger foe, providing it with a much needed food source. It suffered a sprain while taking the trike down, but it was survivable, and a small price to pay for the food and nourishment that it could now have. But instead, it chose not to eat, prioritising thirst over hunger. Its companion, the Majungasaur, who chose not to fight earlier, was motivated by its comrade's victory and decided to take on a Triceratops itself. Despite getting the first bite in and doing some considerable damage, the fight ended in a stalemate. The Majungasaur suffered a broken claw, but the Triceratops might have come off worse, picking up a concussion that it might not have the health to recover from. The first Majungasaur returned to its feast, wanting the whole thing for itself and refusing to let its companion eat from it at all. But now the time has come for the jacked up Giganotosaurs to be released into the ecosystem. And with them, the balance of the sanctuary has been shaken. Named Giant and Gerald, these beasts are fluent in only one language, and that language is violence. Over in the snow comes the emergence of new life in the form of 4 new chickens, as the Pyroraptors welcome new members of their pack. These juveniles are born pure of heart and have no interest in anything other than their tails. The new Giganotosaurs wasted no time whatsoever. Gerald stumbled upon the battle sites of Rexy and Osborne and was insulted at the notion of an Acrocanthosaur claiming the top dog position here. Gerald got straight into the action, fighting Osborne in a one-on-one duel. And in the end, despite Gerald's confidence and genetic advantages, it was Osborne who once more came out on top, leaving Gerald on the verge of death and with a concussion. A rather disappointing debut fight for our new aggressive Titan, and proof that Osborne really is an absolute beast. Jason, the first naturally bred dinosaur in the sanctuary, was now fully grown and had developed into a large, powerful beast. After taking down a Therizinosaurus with ease, he went to quench his thirst of his father before returning to eat the meal that he had well and truly earned. Gerald was looking much worse for wear following his misjudged fight with Osborne. His concussion was causing him serious issues, and all he could do was rest and sleep off the injuries, hoping for the best. It was time though for yet another species to arrive in the sanctuary, the Eutyrannus. This Chinese tyrannosaur measured in at 9 meters in length and is one of the most documented feathered dinosaurs out there today. They were powerful predators that hunted in groups, and they would be a serious menace in the sanctuary. Mayhem and the rest of the Velociraptor pack had been slowly dwindling down the population of the smaller dinosaurs. Mayhem here was feasting on his most recent kill in the river, though the water was obscuring what he had actually killed. The herbivore population in the sanctuary was getting bolstered with some genetically enhanced Kentrosauruses. Though not as impressive in size as their American cousins, they still possessed many sharp spikes on their back and would hurt any predator that got too close. The Dinocheiruses have been living their best life in the sanctuary so far, though that may soon change as this Spinosaurus is getting quite close to its territory. The Triceratops had suffered at the teeth and claws of the Majungasaurs, and to make matters worse, they were now fighting one another. There was a clear lack of confidence in the leader, and they were challenging horn for horn to determine the strongest and who was best to face the power of the Majungasaurs. The new Giganotosaurs, though, finally made their mark on the ecosystem, and sadly, it was at the expense of Terry. Terry was a sanctuary OG and will be sorely missed. RIP to Terry. But where there is death, there is also life. The oasis that is the Biosing Sanctuary has welcomed even more juvenile dinosaurs. First of all was this trio of Pachycephalosauruses, and next up was another pair of Pyroraptors, who were welcomed by their parents and were fascinated by their tails. It wasn't just the small dinosaurs that were breeding though, as a T-Rex nest had a new egg inside as well, which was set to hatch soon. A small herd of Lokiceratops were airlifted in, and also a pair of Baryonyxes were born on day 60. In the snow, there was a battle between the feathered raptors as the Utahraptor and Pyroraptor scrapped for territory. The Utahraptor had the size advantage, but the Pyroraptor was faster and more nimble. But it appears that size truly does matter most, and the Utahraptor managed to pin down the Pyro, ending its life with a single neck bite. A juvenile Pyroraptor hid in the nearby forest as it chased its tail, completely oblivious that its parent had just been killed, while its sibling was drinking from the river, also unaware of the tragedy that had just occurred. The Velociraptors had chosen the edge of the forest for their hunting grounds, and they were in luck as a juvenile Oloratitan wandered too close to their territory. But the hunt did not go as expected. After getting back up from the first attack, the raptor decided to show pity on the Hadrosaur and let it live. The benevolent raptor was named Mercy. The Oloratitan meanwhile fled across the river I don't think it will ever appreciate how close it was to dying. The new baby Rex had hatched out of its nest, with its parents already waiting for it. It had the potential for an unlimited power ahead of it as the future king of Biosyn Valley. Named Rexy 2.0, we will watch his career with great interest. Rexy 1.0, now elderly and in the twilight of her life, greeted the newborn and then went off to find some food. The arrival of yet more genetically strong dinosaurs will happen soon at Biosyn, and this time it was the Iguanodons who are incubating and will soon hatch. Jason had now set his eyes on his next kill, and this time he was planning big. Taking after his aunt Rexy, he decided that Diplodocus was a suitable enough target. He ignored the juveniles as they couldn't provide nearly enough of a challenge or nutrition for Jason, and instead went straight for an adult. He bit down on the sauropod's hind leg with some force before moving on to the front leg. The Diplodocus didn't topple this time, but it wasn't bad for a first attempt from Jason. After a humiliating first defeat against the Acrocanthosaur of the Sanctuary, Gerald was in need of some redemption. Taking down Ferries was all well and good, but he needed to prove himself against the apexes of Biosyn. So he decided to challenge Jason to a fight, and the Tyrannosaur accepted. The fight started poorly as Jason got the first bite in, but Gerald responded with a strong bite of his own. They then collided with full force of their bodies, but ultimately it was Gerald who fled again, taking another defeat against an apex carnivore and picking up yet another concussion. He retreated behind cover, where he was forced to rest off his wounds, and if Gerald could somehow survive this, it would be a bit of a miracle. Not satisfied with not completing the kill though, Jason turned his pent-up anger towards a creature that was not deserving of such treatment, a poor juvenile oviraptor. Incredibly, the tiny juvenile survived the first attack, but he would not be so lucky the second time around. Jason rested beside his kill, knowing that he would have a neat little snack waiting for him when he decided to get up. The Tyrannosaurs were now becoming a bit of a menace towards the young dinosaurs, and this time it was a juvenile Diplodocus that got the brunt of the attack. The young sauropod survived and was thus given the name Speedy. The newly bred Iguanodons were airlifted into the sanctuary. There were 3 of them in total, 1 male and 2 females, and they would serve as an interesting dynamic in the ecosystem as a hadrosaur that could actually fight back. Shire, the juvenile Suchomimus, was alone and struggling. Having not eaten for days, she was on the verge of death. In a rare act of intervention in Biosyn Valley, I installed a fish feeder for her to access, but still, it was too late. Shire starved to death a few mere yards away from a plentiful food source. Rest in peace, Shire, in the comments down below, gone too soon. It was now round 2 between the Giganotosaurus and the Tyrannosaurus Rex. With the last round going the way of the Rex, Gerald was once more determined to prove himself. They stared down at one another for a long time before the Giga made a decisive move. It charged at the Rex's snout before dodging the counterattack and grabbing the Rex's exposed neck with its jaw. It threw the Rex to the ground and finished it off with a simple neck bite. It had taken them 70 days, but the Giganotosaurs could finally make a valid claim as an apex species in the sanctuary once more. Rexy 2.0 seemed to sense the death of its elder relative and was frightened. It felt vulnerable and stayed close to his parent for safety. Juveniles getting lost and alone was becoming a concerning theme in the Biosyn Sanctuary now. This time it was an Edmontosaurus who had lost its way and was on the brink of starvation. And so for a second time in only a matter of days, I had to intervene and perform some landscaping, chopping down some trees and planting vegetation so this little guy can live for yet another day. In all this time, the Spinosaurus still hadn't done anything of note, and he hadn't even claimed a single kill. He was rather simple in nature, but that doesn't mean he wasn't deserving of a name, so I dubbed him Simon. The feathered raptor wars were still raging on between the Utahraptor and the Pyroraptor. But it was a rather one-sided affair, as the Utahraptor's much larger size meant there was little that the nimbly Pyroraptors could do. The Utahraptors were putting their bodies to good use, getting the valuable nutrition from their feathered meats, and putting the Pyroraptors almost on the verge of extinction. As we reached day 75, I took time to appreciate the natural ecosystem that has been manufactured in the Dolomites. I watched our inhabitants, large and small, carnivore and herbivore, old and young, all of whom were living their lives as nature intended. Many of them living peacefully, but some violently, such as this Baryonyx, who had been killed in a brawl with a Utahraptor. But even now, more carnivorous theropods were being cooked up in Biosyn's hatcheries, and this time it was a pair of Albertosauruses. An unlikely friendship was forming in the Great Lakes of the Sanctuary, as an Irritator and Deinocheirus or just simply hanging out together. The Irritator was taking a relaxing swim, while the Kairos was hunting for some fish. The shared conversation must have been absolutely fascinating, whether about the excellent welfare at the sanctuary or the top tier Rampy content that they had both subscribed to. Gerald had eaten his fair share of the Rex that he had killed, and now he was sleeping off the banquet and allowing his body to heal from the wounds inflicted on him from the fight. He remained by the corpse, ensuring that it remained claimed to him, and an Oviraptor walked on by, not daring to try its luck and take a piece. There was a bit of panic among the Diplodocus herd as Rexy and Rexy 2.0 wandered too close to their territory. Their panic was short-lived though, as the Rexes innocuously walked on by to get a drink from the river. Speedy was looking a little bruised and bloody, but his health readings showed that he was actually in pristine health, so it must just be the natural scrapes that energetic young dinosaurs pick up. The Albertosaurs had now been airlifted towards the north of the sanctuary. These were medium-sized relatives of the Tyrannosaurus Rex, but were lighter and more nimble. First discovered in Alberta, Canada, they used their powerful legs and sharp teeth to chase and hunt hadrosaurs. They arrived not too far from the last surviving ankylosaur, who had long been displaced from its preferred habitat by the stegosaurs. Steve was on his usual leisurely glides above the forest. Having just eaten, he wasn't on the hunt just yet, but on the ground beneath him, Mayhem was as always on the prowl, having just killed a Dryosaurus. As Mayhem began to feast, I was notified that Rexy had begun to hunt down one of the Diplodocuses. Rexy intimidated the sauropod at first, getting very close to its personal space, before attacking one of the front legs of the Diplo. Rexy was now well into her golden years and tired easily, and so the Diplodocus did manage to survive. After a brief observation of a trio of baryonyxes joining the large collection of naturally bred dinosaurs in the sanctuary, we now watch another confrontation between the Majungasaurs and the Triceratops. The smaller carnivores had typically gotten the better of the larger herbivores so far, but this time it was the Trike who struck first. The Majungasaur retaliated before the cycle repeated itself, both landing one hit apiece. The Majungasaurus fled, and the Trike remained standing strong. The Triceratops only suffered a small amount of damage, but also did suffer a broken claw, which it was subsequently named after. For the most part, it did win the duel, but it would remain to be seen whether it would be able to shake off the broken claw, or whether it would progress to something much worse. Over in the wetlands, the Baryonyxes and Suchomimuses had been getting on like a house on fire, but that all changed once the newborn Baryonyxes had arrived at their shared watering hole. This Suchomimus became aggressive and hunted down the Baryonyx juveniles. One was killed, and yet another one was injured. The adult Baryonyxes were not doing a good job enough of protecting their young, and their children were paying the price for it. The steroid-enhanced Giganotosaurs had been a bit of a letdown. While Gerald had managed to kill an elderly Tyrannosaur, they had not done a good enough job at asserting themselves as the true apex of the ecosystem. And that would be even harder now, as we had had an escapee from the lab. That's right, the bloodthirsty killer, the Indominus Rex, was now on the loose in Bayerson Valley. Whether it was about to wipe out an entire ecosystem was the question on everyone's lips. Some of the fresh blood among the Utahraptor pack believed that it was time for a new leader, and that Uzi's time was up. This young gun with the yellow feathers challenged Uzi one-on-one for the alpha position, and they scrapped. Uzi allowed her experience to prevail this time, and taught the young whippersnapper a lesson: to never question an older head in an environment where so many die young. There looked to be more Utahraptor action in the snow, as one and a Pyroraptor encountered one another and looked to be squaring up for a fight. In the end, it was all a bit anticlimactic, as both of them just ran past each other, both choosing survival over dominance. A Triceratops had been found dead by the river, and autopsy found that it had died from an infected wound. Nearby, Broken Claw remained as the only Triceratops in the area, but he may too soon suffer the same fate if his claw injury didn't heal cleanly. The scientists at Biocid were busy in the hatcheries now as we reached day 80. First up to be produced was a batch of Argentine Carnotaurs, followed by the gargantuan Mamenchisaurus. Following them would be a tiny group of Psittacosauruses, and then came the incubation phase, where a male Mamenchisaurus was to be hatched, followed by 6 Psittacosauruses, 3 male, 3 female, and lastly of course would be the 4 Carnotauruses, 2 male and 2 female. Before they could release, however, there was yet another battle in the endless saga between the Majungasaurs and the Triceratops. This time it was the showdown between Mighty and Broken Claw, who had somehow managed to recover from his injury. Mighty had taken down a Triceratops before, but was forced to take the brunt of the Trike's horn as the herbivore struck first. Mighty did respond with a swift counterattack, but after a second set of attacks, the Majungasaur fled, and Broken Claw remained strong once more, managing to avoid a second Broken Claw this time around. There was another battle of the apex predators, but this time it was Giant rather than Gerald, and the opponent was an Acrocanthosaur. The Acro attacked first with a powerful bite, before Giant responded with a strong bite of her own. The two beasts then lunged at each other with all their might. Bloody and beaten, Giant ran for her life into the trees. But the Acro was unwilling to let such easy prey escape its clutches, and chased Giant into the trees. While all that was happening, we missed another clash of the Titans. Gerald and Jason fought, and this time there was a definite winner. Jason, to shock, was found dead, fatally struck down by Gerald. Dodid went for revenge on her fallen son, and immediately challenged Gerald to a fight. The elderly Rex managed to get a strong bite in, which caused Gerald to flee. After proving himself victorious against Jason, Gerald didn't have anything to prove, so he abandoned the fight before he took too much damage. He didn't make it far though, before he was forced to lay down and sleep off his concussion once more. The Sanctuary though could now welcome the new arrivals. First was the minuscule Psittosauruses, and these early ceratopsids were only around 2 meters in length at most. They had a beaked mouth, a stubby body, and fed on low-hanging plant life and shrubbery. Next up though was the behemoth Mamenchosaurus. Originating in China, it could reach a size of up to 25 meters, half of which was because of its extraordinarily long neck. A slow-moving sauropod, it could use its neck to reach vegetation across a wide area without having to move its body much. The Indominus Rex had touched ground in the snow region of the Sanctuary. The machete-like teeth, long claws, and powerful jaws, as well as its armoured skin, made this monster combined with immense strength and also hyper-intelligence. With camouflage ability, heat-seeking skills, this aggressive beast would often be the last thing that its prey would ever see. The Baryonyx nest had been repopulated with eggs, and they needed to rejuvenate their numbers following the Suchomimus attack not so long ago. The Indominus Rex was given the name of Silver, and she was on the prowl for her first victim. In the plains though, there were 2 fights between the Majungasaurs and the Triceratops happening simultaneously. In Mighty's fight, both combatants were getting hits in a piece, but in the background fight, the Majungasaur managed to take down the Ceratopsid. Mighty however could not quite take down his opponent, and was forced to retreat after getting hurt. Following Jason's death, morale was at an all-time low between the Tyrannosaurus Rexes. Infighting between the group and domestic violence was at an all-time high, and young Rexy 2.0 was getting upset at his parents' disagreements and tried to get between them. But back in the plains, things were not looking too good for this Majungasaur. It was low on health and suffering both from internal bleeding and an infected wound. It drank to get some strength back, but I don't think it will be enough, and that its time left in its ecosystem is short. Silver had now got her first kill of the Sanctuary, as she picked on this Baryonyx in the river, who could do nothing to defend herself from her might. Silver ate from the body, celebrating her first kill of many, and things weren't going too well for the Baryonyxes, as they had lost another juvenile to a Suchomimus. At long last though, the Spinosaurs finally got in on the action, but it wasn't Simon, instead it was Nokia. She picked on something much smaller in a Baryonyx, and managed to take out the Barry effortlessly, though did get a little bit confused at one point, biting at the water instead of its foe. But still, she did finally claim the first kill for the Spinosaurus in the Sanctuary. The Baryonyx numbers had now taken a big hit, but luckily for them, more was on the way, as 3 juveniles emerged from the nest. It appeared that the Baryonyxes were determined that they were not going to go down without a fight. There had been some infighting between Mighty and the already seriously injured Majungasaur. The fight broke off before things turned fatal, but the wounded one mustn't have long left now. I named her Warrior, as she surely lived a warrior's life, and will soon have a warrior's death. Checking in on the raptor species, Plod was elderly now, but had lived a peaceful and fulfilling life in solitude by her lake in the snow. Mayhem had also lost the alpha title to the Raptor Pack, but wasn't going to give it up without a fight. He challenged the newly appointed alpha to a fight, and they battled tooth and claw. After a long duel, Mayhem, as expected, came out on top. His opponent fled, and he regained the crown. Gerald had almost returned to near full fitness, though of course he was still carrying a concussion. And Giant had also fully recovered from her skirmish with the Acrocanthosaurus. Round 57 was occurring between the Majungasaurs and the Triceratops though. This time, it was Broken Claw versus Mighty once more. Broken Claw looked to be getting the better of his opponent, with Mighty looking much worse for wear. However, after Mighty got a bite in, Broken Claw decided to run for it, despite being mostly unharmed other than some minor surface wounds. Osborne was at it once more, but this time he was fighting a much smaller opponent in a Kentrosaurus, beneath the gargantuan neck of a Mamenchisaurus. It's hard to say what happened in the fight, but all that is for certain is that Osborne changed targets not long later, choosing instead to attack the Mamenchisaurus itself. If the Aquacanthosaurus proved anything in this sanctuary, it's that they can take down large targets. The Mamenchisaur survived the attack, but did lose a large chunk of its health. The Mamenchi was then named Marmite. Gerald and Giant had taken a break from all the constant violence, and instead decided to settle down. A nest was formed and eggs were laid. Not long later, the eggs hatched, and out emerged two Giganotosaurus twins, who were small now, but would bloom into legendary hunting and fighting monsters of Biosyn. Their parents soon met them, and they started off their lives learning some key socializing skills. Silver, our Indominus Rex, has lived a life of constant anger, and she spends most of her time screaming at nothing at all. It's as if she has a vendetta against the Earth itself. A juvenile Baryonyx found itself in the wrong place at the wrong time, and she was running for its life to try and escape the walking crime against nature. But Silver's senses were advanced enough to hear it fleeing, and her heat vision spotted it. Silver was much faster than the juvenile Piscivore, and it had absolutely no chance of surviving her rampage. The juvenile then lost all remaining dignity, as Silver decided to rest on its corpse. Following her first kill in the lakes, Nokia now had a thirst for blood. She picked up 3 more kills since her first, and was leaving a trail of bodies behind her. The quartet of Carnotauruses had now landed in the centre of our sanctuary. These meat-eating bulls originated from Argentina, and were easily identifiable by their horns above their eyes and their tiny arms. 8-metre-long carnivores, they were rapid in speed and agile hunters. Utahraptors continued in their conquest to take over the snow biome. They have received quite a sizable boost in their numbers, with 3 newborns emerging from the nest that they had claimed. Right now they were more interested in chasing their tails, but soon they would grow up to become invaluable members of the pack. Uzi was lurking not too far behind the juveniles, keeping them safe and making sure they all developed well. In the peaceful herbivore area, the Sauropelta was coming towards the end of its life. It no longer had the strength to even get up and eat. But as we all know by now, when there is death, there is also life, and 5 newborn Edmontosauruses hatched from a nest, though they did immediately start panicking since they couldn't find their parents. But on day 90, a massacre was underway. Many dinosaurs, carnivores and herbivores were found dead, including Mighty and Big Mike. In the end, it appeared that during the long-raging war between the Majungasaurs and the Triceratops, neither species had truly come out victorious. The one survivor, however, was Broken Claw, who would hopefully get to live out the rest of his life in peace. There was a fight going on between our 2 medium-sized tyrannosaurs, as an Albertosaurus and Eutyrannus clashed in the glassless plains beneath an observation tower. The fight itself appeared to be even, with both gladiators getting a bite in, before the 2 combatants agreed to call it a draw and moved on amicably. But only after the fight did reports show that the Eutyrannus was seriously injured and carrying lacerations, while the Albertosaurus was largely unharmed. Life in the herbivore plains, however, was calm, relaxed and happy, but the population was ageing because of the lack of nests in the area. Our landscapers intervened and placed some down, but we weren't sure how many would be used, as the place resembled a retirement home more than anything. Most of the dinosaurs in this area were past their peak fertility days, and an Ankylosaurus had even perished of old age. A clash of titans, however, was occurring at the edge of the forest, as Silver was involved in her first major brawl, as she was taking on Norman. The 2 beings then slammed their bodies at each other at full power, with the seismic effects being felt throughout the whole sanctuary. After this, Norman fled, bloodied and wounded, suggesting Silver did a lot of damage before I even arrived at the scene. Silver roared in victory and rested, confident in the knowledge that Norman wouldn't come back to attack her again. She was right, as Norman retreated carrying a minor fracture and desperate to get away to rest and heal. A juvenile Baryonyx was swimming in the river, desperate to find its parents, who were absolutely nowhere to be seen. Its father, Alcatraz, was resting in the middle of the field, completely oblivious that he even had any offspring out there looking for him. He got up and continued his life as usual. Norman's scars from his fight with Silver had almost fully recovered, but he was dealt a major blow. His minor fracture had worsened, pressure from walking causing it to develop into a major fracture. It would remain to be seen whether Norman would be able to survive the night. Whereas Nokia, however, continued to fight and take down her enemies with some dark magic, where she didn't even touch them at all. Her magical powers had now earned her a new name, which was Snape. This solo Proceratosaurus was starving and desperate. With no other choice, it challenged the first creature that it came across, which happened to be a Lokiceratops. If it was successful, it would have a meal that would last it for a long time, but unfortunately for it, it wasn't. The fight was a mismatch, and the Proceratosaurus was now sadly extinct in the Biosync Sanctuary. Another challenger tried to take the alpha position from Mayhem, and as usual, another challenger failed to take the alpha position from Mayhem. Mayhem is perhaps the most meanest looking Velociraptor I've ever seen, so it's no wonder that they continue to lead the pack. A surprise was in store, however, on day 99, as Silver was found dead in the grassy plains. By her body was Simon, who had done absolutely nothing up to now. But it turns out that Simon was simply biding his time. He wanted his first kill to be notable, and there was nothing more notable than taking down the Indominus Rex itself. Now he can return to a casual life of fish hunting, knowing that the balance of power has been returned in the Biosync Sanctuary. With the Indominus Rex slain, the herbivores can live, breathe, and breed a little more freely. These Lokiceratops added to their numbers, with 4 more juveniles emerging from the nest, and this one here looked like the happiest dinosaur in the sanctuary, bouncing around without a care in the world. The Iguanodons were also adding to their family, with 4 new juveniles welcomed by their mother. But as we hit day 100 in the Biosync Sanctuary, there was still time for one more final brawl. It was a rematch between Osborn and Gerald was not looking up for this fight at all. This was also proven when Osborn managed to get a crucial bite on the Giga's snout, dragging him down and performing a brutal neck bite, ending Gerald's life right in front of his child, traumatizing this young Giga for life. Osborn didn't even eat from Gerald's corpse, he simply walked away, leaving the juvenile Giga to rot in anguish next to its father's body. Giant arrived on the scene much too late, heartbroken and furious of what had just happened. The baby Giga slept, but no doubt its dreams were now haunted by what it had just witnessed. But with all that, and the Indominus Rex now slain, I think it's pretty safe to say that the Aquacanthosaurs, and Norman in particular, had the undeniable claim that they were the apex carnivores of Biosyn Valley. On day 100, away from all the pain and chaos, I watched as a pair of Suchomimuses emerged from the forest towards their preferred habitat by the river. There they could rest and swim, with little care for what is going on around them. It seemed that Biosync Sanctuary had finally reached its potential of being a living, breathing dinosaur ecosystem. Thank you all so much for watching my latest 100-day dinosaur simulation. If you have enjoyed, please do remember to leave a like on the video, it really does help support the channel, and of course subscribe if you are new around here. Join the Discord below, and I want to hear what you guys want me to simulate next in the comments down below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, why not watch the one that YouTube has put on your screen right now, as they think that you will love it. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you all in the next one.